All right, everyone. This is Jeremy Kelly again speaking for John Curcio. Say hello, John.
How's it going, guys?
For those of you who have tuned in, although there are so very many of you, uh, roughly a year ago, or I posted these podcasts of myself and John talking about the Halloween franchise right around the time that they had announced a new movie starring Jamie Lee Curtis, which is in theaters today.
Absolutely.
So we thought it was only appropriate that we uh, give our own thoughts about the movie and just how well it's doing. And I think we're both in agreement that this is the most suspenseful and scariest movie since the original.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair assessment. I think this is probably the best Michael's been since the original film.
We were talking a little bit before how you almost got to see the movie out in California early.
Yeah, yeah, that was interesting. I actually had I had a ticket to go see Halloween as a part of a three picture screening. It was going to be Black Christmas, the original Halloween, and then the new Halloween. Um, the first time, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go. Then the second time, I was able to go, except the thing is, I would have had to have gone to the last screening. I couldn't go to the first two. However, they're very big sticklers about that stuff. So they were like, no, you have to sit for all three. So I got screwed over on that one. But fortunately, I live out here in Los Angeles, and I'm from Jersey originally, as I think I've stated before. And it turns out I was actually going back there to visit family. So I actually was kind of glad because oddly enough, even though the first Halloween was filmed in Pasadena, which is where nearer where I am now, I always think of my own hometown when I think of Haddonfield. And I think that might have to do with the fact that Deborah Hill was from Jersey, and there is a Haddonfield in New Jersey too. So I don't know. There's a weird kinship that I feel like I have with the series, particularly from being back home and with my family again. So it was a nice night out. I got to see it with my brother and my parents, and we all definitely got our money's worth. That's for sure.
It's funny how New Jersey is sort of a horror state because that's where the Friday the 13th movies are supposed to take place, and the original was filmed in Warren County.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if you've ever seen Alice, Sweet Alice, one with Brooke Shields from back then, was filmed in Patterson, New Jersey.
Oh wow, yeah. I don't know what it is. Maybe in the '80s it was just cheaper to film here, or I don't know. It just I guess it just felt right. I don't know. I guess there's something about Jersey that feels just kind of I don't know, TV or movie basic for you know what I mean for translation. I don't know. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, it is interesting. It took me years to realize that Camp Crystal Lake was in Jersey. I've always admittedly been more of a Halloween guy than a Friday the 13th guy, so I tend to
Yeah.
forget that actually took place in New Jersey.
Something I want to ask real quick. You had mentioned before, like living around Pasadena. Have you done the tour of the locations like you had alluded to possibly doing at some point?
I actually I drove past the Doyle residence.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, I don't know where the pictures are. I have 837 million useless photographs backed up on my computer, so it's hard to sift through them. But yeah, I drove past that once. And honestly, anytime driving through Pasadena, it really does get the I have to put "Don't Fear the Reaper" on because I just get that I get that Halloween vibe whenever I'm passing through there.
Now, I do wish, the more I think about it, that this new movie was also filmed in Pasadena, but I think it
Yeah,
was filmed in
North
Atlanta or
Carolina.
something. Oh,
I think it was
North
North
Carolina.
Carolina if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, it's South Carolina.
South Carolina. I was half right. Um, but yeah,
But
no, it was a good flick.
yeah, just do a quick run through of the history of this movie, basically, because after both of Rob Zombie's editions, like the there were talks for years about how they were going to follow up on it. Like there was talk for a time that they would follow those movies, but then that eventually got canned. And then there was talk about something else called Halloween Returns. But then eventually, I think the Weinstein Company uh, lost the rights because they couldn't get anything going in time. So the rights,
They lost more than that, that's for
oh, they
sure.
lost a lot more than that. But the rights eventually went back to Miramax, and that's where this new movie comes into play. They teamed up with Blumhouse and uh, distributed through Universal, and
Hmm.
I think we talked about this before that um, you hear talk all the time about how something's being developed or a script's being written, but this never picked up anywhere near the momentum that it would have if Jamie Lee Curtis hadn't officially signed on.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some reading into it, and I get, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this. I think that this sort of was the brainchild of director David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, and I know Gordon Green also helped on the story. And I think it was them who went to Jason Blum, and then the three of them went to Carpenter and Jamie Lee Curtis. I'm
Mm.
not sure if that's how it worked out, but this collection of five people are really the reason this movie A got off the ground and B works. I mean, Jason Blum is a genius, and this guy's
Oh,
company.
he's I think the biggest name in the horror industry today.
It's not even a question. He is the name. He knows what he's doing, and as I was saying to you the other day, he follows the Carpenter model. When Carpenter originally made Halloween back in '78, I mean, he made it for what $300,000, and he did it on a shoestring budget. He had a solid, airtight story. He cast solid, talented actors, and just had a script that worked. That's all that. At the end of the day, I could gush about the first Halloween and I did, from here to Kingdom Come. But at the end of the day, it was just very simply Carpenter just put his skills to work, and everybody just made the best movie they could with a small budget and. Using their imagination to fill in the blanks. And Blum has essentially kind of taken that model of, obviously their budgets are like, between $5 and $10 million, but that's considered very low for today's standards. And yet these movies always rake in money, and he cares about the product. I mean, if you look at some of the lesser productions like Ouija and Annabelle, those first movies got trashed, but then their sequels were considerably better. So it shows that
Yeah.
they really are trying to break the curse of horror movies just being sort of that overly cheap and unfulfilling stereotype.
Mm.
And I think that he was just the right guy to work with, and of all people, David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, who predominantly are equated with comedy.
Yeah, I
They,
never would have
yeah,
expected.
yeah, I always say that, but the funny thing is, I've noticed that comics tend to have the darkest personalities. They seem to have some really interesting perspectives. So, yeah, I mean, I think that once you had Carpenter and Jamie Lee Curtis on board, that was pretty much it. I mean, it took off like lightning. I almost can't. It's almost surreal that it's in cinemas right now because I feel like we were just talking about this when it was just a nugget of information.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I don't think we got any credit from the producers.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them a call about that. But hopefully, when they do another one, they'll put it on there.
Now, something I read recently was that Carpenter spoke about how, and I think it's fair to say that he has this reputation of being sort of a curmudgeon, and he's spoken in depth about his disdain for the sequels and what they did with Michael Myers, and then give a credit to him for basically saying, I'm done talking the talk. I'm going to walk the walk, and I'm going to actually do something instead of just bitch all the time about it.
Yeah, yeah. Carpenter's sort of it's sort of a tragic figure because he's such he's one of the great artists, and he just always had a lot of conflicts with corporate Hollywood, as a lot of artists do. But
Yeah.
I think he's been doing his damnedest to try and avoid falling back into it. Um, And yeah, I know some people. Yeah, I know like he can come off as a curmudgeon. I just get the idea that he's a guy who kind of likes to keep to himself, and I think that I actually don't think it's too difficult to get him on board to a remake or a reboot. I just think if the pitch is right, he'll go for it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like he just seems that I don't know. He seems to me like a kind of a bit of like just a pragmatist. You know what I mean? Like if it's a good
Okay.
idea, he'll do it. But let's be honest. I'm sure most of the ideas that have been pitched to him since. His last work on 2 and technically 3 has been a lot of really bad, decisions, a lot of bad ideas, and he probably just said no to all of them. But I think also with age comes wisdom, and I think at this point he's like, you know what, like let's show them how it's done. Let's make a proper Halloween 2, because even though I know that we both speak highly of the original Halloween 2, I think he clearly was disappointed with some of the choices he's made story wise, and we'll definitely get into that part when we get into spoilers.
Yeah, what was it you said that one time that he credited Budweiser for getting him through Halloween too?
Oh yeah, and not only did he credit that, I noticed the other night watching Halloween 2 again that I think that's the only beer featured in Halloween 2. So clearly he had some sort of a relationship going on with that beer while he was making that film. So I mean, however he got through.
Hmm. All right, so I guess we should get into talking about the movie now. I don't know about you, but from the first time you see the opening credits to the opening scene at the hospital to when you see the jack-o'-lantern inflating during the main credits, it's like, oh my God, we're back.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I was in the theater, I was sitting next to my brother, and it was just it was a hysterical but very cathartic moment. What's it called? You see when the orange text comes on screen. That's definitely not a spoiler. If anyone considers that a spoiler, seriously, get over yourself. But if when you see the orange original font pop up,
Hmm.
like literally only 1 second of the film had passed, and my brother and I just looked at each other and gave each other the thumbs up. We were like, that's it. I think this is gonna be good. Like we were like, all right. I think we definitely are in good hands here.
Something I meant to bring up when we were talking about the Rob Zombie movies, but I uh, forgot to do so. That the choices of the Halloween theme and when to use them were very bizarre in both of those movies. Like in the first one, I thought it was used way too much, and the second one it wasn't used at all until the
Mm.
credits. Here, I think it's used just the right amount of time.
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, the score is actually a perfect place to start off this discussion. Honestly, because I mean, let's be honest. The score is as important to this franchise as the Jaws theme is to Jaws. It's like it's not just the theme. It's not just the score. It is a character. It is a presence. I liked the fast beat tempo that Carpenter used for the newer theme, and I also listening over to the soundtrack recently. I love the new pieces because I feel as though after Carpenter created the da da da, after he created that, I feel like every sequel kind of just leaned on that and then added a couple of extra bits.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, I feel like they've been just sort of aping the original score too much since. Whereas Carpenter came back and he used just enough homage, he used just enough of the theme, but he used plenty new pieces too, and it felt like a full fleshed out score. So, I was impressed right off the bat.
Now, one thing that was always in my head going into this movie regarding Laurie Strode was, will this feel too much like her arc in H20? And
Yeah.
it really wasn't because in that movie it's more about her trying to like get away and forget about what happened. But here, she's not avoiding anything. She's spending the whole movie saying, "This is what happened, and this is what I'm doing about it."
Yeah, it's interesting. It shows sort of the two responses to post-traumatic stress. Well, there's more than one response. There's more than one. There's more than two.
Yeah.
But for Laurie Strode, H2O catches her at about around catches her around middle age, and she's a career woman. So that was a new and older Laurie Strode then, but it is interesting. It's hard to kind of equate them because Laurie in H2O was in her middle age, where now Laurie here is in, I find it difficult to say elderly because Jamie Lee looks so good, but
Yeah.
but she is technically in her elderly years now. She's a grandmother in this film, so
Yeah.
even on that basis, it feels like you're still looking at two different versions of the character. But one of them in H2O is dealing with it by she closes her eyes and counts to 10 because she wants to forget it and push it away. She even changes her name and starts a new life and has a son with a different man, and there's a whole lot going on. Whereas here, Laurie has never left the town. She's still there. She still sees the same street corners. She still knows the same people that she went to school with. Um, and she has been basically stuck there for the remainder of her life. And you've seen what happens when you go the exact opposite of the Carrie Tate Laurie Strode. This Laurie Strode went the exact opposite. Instead of counting to 10 and hoping he'll go away, she counts to 10 and hopes that he'll keep coming.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like she's gone off the reservation in this one, but it's really sad. It's because you realize that as cool and badass as she is, there was such a great price that she had to pay to get to this part of her life. But yeah, there is definitely a distinct difference between the two. And Jamie Lee was excellent in H2O, but I don't think she's ever been better than this film.
Yeah, because as good as she was in the first movie, she was sort of like not always the main focal point. The main focal point in that one was always Dr. Loomis and Michael,
Yeah.
and here she's featured much more.
Oh yeah, she's the beating heart of the movie. But and so is Michael, but in the more appropriate way. He's right back to his old ways. But the great thing is, you really feel as though this has been a long fuse for him, and he makes up for lost time. That's not even a question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering what direction they were going to go because they said they wanted to bring him back to the shape in the like he was in the original film. But in the original film, he really takes his time. He stalks. He's predatorial, but he often will kind of do things quickly, and he's more theatrical. In this one, I think he dumps the theatrics and he goes straight for just pure, unadulterated brutality in this one.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I
Yeah.
appreciate that because the characters need to evolve. Even Michael needs to evolve in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mentioned Dr. Loomis real quick. I just want to point out whoever it was who did the voice during that one scene where they're listening to the audio,
Yeah.
footage or whatever it was. I could have sworn it was Donald Pleasance. That's how good it sounded.
Yeah, they did a pretty good job in finding a decent match for his voice. And there's also the benefit, of course, of the fact that it's an old tape, so you can distort it a little bit. You can
Yeah.
cover up the fact that it isn't Donald Pleasance, but it was great because I felt like that character needed to have some presence in the film. I don't think that's a spoiler. Obviously, Loomis wasn't going to be in the movie. Donald Pleasance
Yeah.
has been gone for over 20 years. But yeah, it was nice that he definitely had a presence in the film. He has to. He was next to Laurie the most important force in the franchise, and well, obviously next to Michael. But yeah, that was a very interesting way to incorporate him into the story without obviously recasting or finding some sort of a weird loophole to get him into the film.
Or doing what Rogue One did and just CGI him or something like that.
Well, funny story about that because if I'm not sure if you've read any articles about it, but their intent was to open the film. We'll get that into spoiler territory. Just remind me once we get into that part.
Okay. Um, I like the touch that in the clip you can hear him saying it has to die or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, very much in line with his dialogue in the original film. Yeah, they stayed very true to that character, and um, the writers of this movie made sure that they did a really good job both honoring the original, creating a new set of characters, a new set of circumstances, but also we get some great homages to the sequels that they
Oh
essentially
yeah, yeah.
axed. And I think that was their way of telling the fans that despite the fact that they kind of clipped the dead, all the dead fat away, that they still very much honor those sequels and those films. The Silver Shamrock masks. I'm sure you caught
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the mention of Lonnie Lamb, but that was in the first movie, so
Yeah.
that was an homage to that. But there are a lot of really, really, really great references to other films. Of course, Halloween 2 gets a few shout outs in it too, particularly um, the shot in the trailer with that long tracking shot of him going through
Right.
that woman's kitchen.
Yeah.
The mise en scène there. It was they really were going back and homaging that movie like that was a perfect still frame homage to that movie.
And they do another variation of the bathroom stall scare that they use in H2O. Only they go a step further with it this time.
They go quite a step. They go a number of steps forward in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the whole cast worked in this one. They once again going back to the Carpenter model. They populated the movie with new characters and gave us a little nest of new faces, and we got to know some of these people for a little bit, before all the death and mayhem picked up.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like seeing Judy Greer and Will Patton on the screen.
Oh yeah, I mean they're great. They're great character actors, and it's always nice when they get a nice meaty role. And they made those characters more interesting than most horror films wouldn't have really fleshed out those characters a great deal. They would have just simply made Judy Greer's character Karen, I believe is her name, right?
Yeah.
They would have made her just sort of the irritable daughter with no depth other than her contempt, and then they would have just made the sheriff sort of a bureaucratic schmuck who gets caught with his pants down essentially. But they did a really nice job in making sure every character has a motivation, whether big or small, and you get this great, like I said, this great little nest of characters, and you actually care. Like I remember there were a few times where I went, "Oh, that's a shame," Like I actually felt
Yeah.
bad when some of the people were getting cut down. So especially in such a violent in such a violent way.
I don't think he was the sheriff. I think he was a sheriff's deputy.
Oh, really? See. I didn't even. I don't think I paid attention to that. I kind of. Well, I have to. I plan on seeing it at least two more times.
Yeah, I remember him saying sheriff's department, and I think he talks a few times to the guy with the cowboy hat, who I think is supposed to be the sheriff.
Yeah, that guy was that was very interesting. I like that's the Danny McBride and David Gordon Green comedy coming through a little bit by having him with the big ridiculous cowboy hat and kind of dressing a little too much for the occasion. Yeah, little bits of that and the kid. I
Oh,
forget his name. The kid who was
he
being
was
babysat.
hysterical.
He stole every scene he was in, and that type of comedy was used just right. They
Yeah.
didn't have him overstay his welcome. They made sure that he did his bit. Yeah, everyone did a good job. I even honestly I liked the kids who played Laurie's granddaughter's friends.
Yeah, I like them.
Yeah, they did a really good job in making these people feel real and not caricatures. Even have brief appearance they may have had on screen, they always, they felt like real people, and that's important because you're going to essentially watch them die a horrible death. So you want to be endeared to them in some way before it happens.
Yeah, and this is definitely a very current movie, a very timely movie. Like we mentioned, the whole stuff with the PTSD, and Lori kind of like mentioned or I'm sorry, Jamie Lee has kind of mentioned the Me Too movement as far as what these uh, characters go through, and there's even the one guy who just rings of quote unquote nice guy toward the granddaughter in when they're speaking together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They did a great job in being very modern with the fact that the three Strode women are all in the situation. where their lives are kind of being dominated by men in some way, right? Laurie's life has been controlled by just the existence of Michael Myers since '78. And then you have Karen, who's in this sort of just bland milquetoast middle America relationship with Ray, and of course his name is so generic. His name is fucking Ray. You know what I mean? Like, and he's not a bad guy, but she's basically kind of given in to the dull, a homemaker life, and that's even put her in conflict with her own daughter, and then with her. What's her name, with Allison, then you have her sort of at the mercy of her boyfriend, who seems to be really nice. But
Yeah.
once again, we'll save that for spoiler territory. But they did an interesting job in having it. It's not too on the nose. But there is something to it there, that the three leads in this are female, and they're all in some way kind of being sort of, their motivations are being controlled in some way by a male. Um, and going into the conversation of PTSD, I think is very important. I'm a very big proponent for discussions of mental health, and today I think now more than ever people need to talk about it, and especially because of all people in cinema, who else better to talk about post-traumatic stress than the final girl? The final girl, we think that it's so great that they survive, but we never think about the life they have to lead after the fact that they just narrowly escaped death and watched all of their friends brutally murdered. I mean, I doubt very much that they're going to live a completely normal life after that point. So, I thought that was a nice touch that they added to the script.
Yeah, I know that some of the other movies kind of skim the surface of that PTSD. Like I think Zombies 2 did that a little bit, and of course we mentioned H2O. Um, Halloween 5 much poorly done,
Hmm.
but
Well,
but
because they went the science fiction route. They were like, instead of having poor Jamie sort of dealing with PTSD, instead she was dealing with some weird made up psychic connection. Because God forbid they actually discuss psychiatric medicine in a film where the main hero is a fucking psychiatrist. Um, but they just never wanted to go into that territory, because back then horror movies were just big bad man kills young teens, and that's it. That was and you know what, that worked for then. But I think people really enjoy horror films with a beating heart now. They kind of want more. They want more of a cast of characters. I mean, the Conjuring films, even one main thing I love about those films that brings me back, not just the scares, but the couple played by Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson. Like, I
yeah.
go back for them because I love those characters, and I want to see them, go through another, horror story, and hopefully make it through on the other ends. That stuff I think is very important. Um, but yeah, they did a very good job in casting, and we do get a new Loomis character in this too, with Doctor Sartain, and
Yeah.
I was actually, obviously I'll save for spoilers, but I was happy that they didn't just decide to kind of ape Dr. Loomis and just sort of make this guy do the same thing and have him give the long-winded speeches and kind of go the same arc. It was necessary for there to be a successor, but I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they didn't fall down familiar territory, too familiar territory.
Yeah, he's not the Van Helsing character again.
Certainly not. Very different from that old school Van Helsing type, or Captain Ahab character, as some of the horror cliches go. But yeah, definitely it was good that they introduced that character. But like I said, I'm glad they didn't go too overboard with it.
One thing that I really love seeing in horror movies is um, giving you scenes where you have to look all over the screen, and
Hmm.
that's what I was doing through a lot of this movie. I was just constantly looking around, like just constantly thinking, "Where's Michael? I know he's here. I know he's here. Where is he?"
Yeah, they brought back that style of filmmaking that has been missing in a lot of them. Horror movies, particularly Halloween films themselves, when they're trying to ape Carpenter, they tend to just go for they jump, and then it turns out to be a cat, and then they jump and it's their friend tapping them on the shoulder, and it gets so tiresome after a while. But in this movie, they do something very different, which is like you said, you're straining your eyes. You're like my palms were sweaty. I just the fact that the music would drop at certain points and you just had sort of the creaking of the floorboards and just breathing and pretty I forgot to breathe a few times while I was watching it. It definitely it brought back that brutal tension from the original movie where you're just gripping your seats and you almost just want it to get over with already because you just can't handle it anymore. And to me, that's better than even the jolt. I think that sitting there and and digging your fingernails into your thighs is better than just simply having a stupid cat jump out of a out of a closet or something. But yeah, particularly the end sequence, which once again I won't give too much away. The end sequence was so masterfully, pardon me, so masterfully directed. Um, it didn't just bring back elements of Halloween of the first Halloween. It was we were getting sequences and filmmaking techniques that they haven't done not only in the Halloween franchise that they just don't do in horror films usually in general. They went pretty artistic with this one, not to sound pretentious, but I feel like David Gordon Green directed the hell out of this movie because you don't follow up John Carpenter with a with B grade nonsense. He brought his A game.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. He did a very good job. Pretty much everyone involved in this movie has shown and proven that they really love this franchise and that they really wanted to do it justice.
Oh, that's not even a question. You can feel the love and affection that these people had for this movie.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna get into spoiler territory.
Oh,
But
thank God, because it's so difficult to hold back.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the movie yet, we'll just sum up by saying it's suspenseful, it's well acted, it's pretty much everything you want to see in a Halloween movie.
Yeah, if you're listening and you haven't picked up by now, we clearly both really liked the movie. Um, it's damn good. Yeah, I would say I've been able to sit on it long enough to think I would say it's most certainly the best sequel we've had since the original, and it's definitely one of the best horror films we've had in a while too.
All right, so I guess we'll get into the meat of the story here now. What did you think specifically about Dr. Sartain and how his character turns out?
Well, that was interesting because I remember going in when the film started. Um, and you hear sort of his distorted voice discussing Michael as a patient, was it Smith's Grove again, or were they at a different hospital this time?
I think it was Smith's Grove. I think it's just like retitled as like a rehabilitation hospital or something.
I gotcha. Yeah, there was. I remember when they did have this sort of really interesting out of focus shot of his pen, which has the spinal cord on it, which is actually something that often doctors do own those types of pens. But there was something about it where I was like, I don't know why that just rubs me the wrong way. And once he started describing Michael, I was like, oh, he's not describing him. He is describing him the way Loomis described him, except when Loomis talked about Michael, he would tremble, his voice would crack, and he would, because essentially it's challenging all of his beliefs. He's a practitioner of medicine, and he's talking about the boogeyman as if like almost like a like a someone who is deeply religious. Um, Whereas when Sartain is talking about Michael, he's talking about him like he's his biggest fan.
Yeah.
Like his obsession is very different from Loomis. Loomis's obsession wasn't so much trying to understand it; he wanted to destroy it. Whereas where Sartain is talking about Michael, it sounds like he wants to nurture him. So I was thinking, the two ways this could possibly go is he is so soft handling Michael that it's going to get him killed, which it did. But it was on the other extreme, which was he's a fanboy. And that was that was really at first I didn't know how to feel about the twist, but once he slips on Michael's mask, I was like, he's a fanboy. He's been studying and obsessing over Michael for 40 years, or or at least since he first met the subject, and then since then, it's become such an obsession that now he can't just read about it or talk about it anymore. He's trying to live it. So I thought that it was interesting that not just him, but the you can't really call them journalists as they like to call them, but the characters of
Podcasters.
yeah,
Hey.
exactly. But the thing is, these two people, I think, were the Corey and Rianne, right? Corey and oh no, Rianne's the name of the actress. Um,
Dana and Aaron.
Dana and Aaron Corey, yeah. So it's interesting because Aaron is really pretentious, and he likes to wax philosophic all the time, and it's funny because he actually refers to them as bloggers or podcasters, and then she refers to them as journalists, which they're not. They're basically, you can tell they're a different type of fanboy. They want to look at it on the outside, and they want to look at every detail. And also I think I look at them as kind of like rich people who have too much time on their hands.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's why they're able to get their hands on the mask. And it comes down to it. Michael's whole escape basically occurs because. These bloggers and this doctor all just can't let go of what happened 40 years ago. So I almost feel as though it's sort of a slight nudge saying that the fanboys sometimes can get a little too into a series. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm probably digging too much into it, but I just thought it was interesting that they could have made it investigative journalists, but they chose to make them younger people who are doing podcasts. Because our generation is fascinated with killers. One of the
Yeah.
number one Netflix series is Making a Murderer. I know countless friends who spend hours watching the ID Network.
Oh,
And
my parents watch that channel a lot.
yeah, ad infinitum. Everyone watches that stuff. People are interested in killers, so it is interesting that that of all people to sort of accidentally set Michael off, it was a couple of bloggers who got their hands on Michael's mask. So I really liked that they didn't just go the route of Michael's just decided tonight I'm gonna break out, and there was kind of a uh, basically there were sort of outside agitators who sort of almost forced this to happen, and I liked that idea. I thought it was an interesting way to get him free of his shackles.
Now, what I thought of the twist with Sartain is,
Mhm.
and this is probably reading too deep into it, but the way I thought was that uh, his was is sort of representing all the sequels and theories who are constantly just, why is Michael like this? Why is he doing this? Why is he doing that? And Michael's response of killing him was basically, I guess you could say, this movie and Carpenter in a way saying there is no logic, there is no reason. Michael is just a killer, and that's it.
That's it. Yeah, there's no reason to even try and understand him. And yeah, that's the thing is the characters in this film who are more interested in learning about his modus operandi end up getting some of the worst deaths in the film, and they if anything they end up setting him free essentially. But yeah, Sartain definitely has that fanboyism where he's obsessing over has Michael spoken? Has he ever said anything? And I think he was really obsessing over the relationship between Michael and Laurie and trying to figure out why there's a connection. And at the end of the day, the connection very simply is he destroyed her life. And because of his random killing spree, and now she wants to kill him. There's really nothing beyond that point, and all we're really left with at the end of the story is a woman and her daughter and her grandchild. It's at the end of the day, it's not trying to figure out what makes the man tick. It doesn't matter. It's just simply he has to get stopped and put down at the end of the day. That's it. You know, there's no cult of Thorn. There's no ancient Irish Celtic witchcraft. There's no
White trash
Luke. I
family.
am. Yeah, there's no white trash family. There's no big Empire Strikes Back twist. There's none of it, and I think that that was the best route. They wiped the slate clean and got rid of all the sludge.
Now, you had mentioned before that they originally had a different idea of how to open the movie with Loomis.
Yeah, I had read that their initial intention was they were going to recreate the opening. I'm sorry, the ending of the first one,
Hmm.
and that after Michael fell to his death, seemingly that I guess Loomis was going to go out after him, and then Michael was going to kill Loomis before he got
Oh
picked up by
yeah,
the police, and they were
I
going to
think I did
use
read that. Yeah.
yeah, they were going to use the digital effects that were used to de-age to create Peter Cushing, ironically, who was up for the role of Doctor Loomis in the original
Mm-hmm.
movie, for Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. But they said that they felt something was off about it. They said something was icky about it, and honestly, I understand the impetus of filmmakers who are making sequels to movies that they grew up with to want to
To
play in
fill in the gaps, basically.
that, and they want to play in the sandbox. You know, they want to fill in all the gaps and the answers. And sometimes I don't think you should. Sometimes I think you should go the simpler route. And with this, um, killing Loomis off in that kind of a way just feels wrong,
Yeah.
especially because of how important he is to the franchise. I like the idea that the character's presence is mostly in the fact that we learn in his later years he was simply trying to appeal for Michael's execution, because that to me sounds about right for him. But
Yeah.
killing him off that way, I think it would have started the movie off on a sour note, and you would have had a hard time getting some people back from that. So they were right in just in axing that idea. Start the movie present. Don't worry about the past. And also, if you watch Halloween 2, you see the ending of the first one again, and it's like let's stop going back to that ending over and over again. You know,
Yeah.
let's move on.
Yeah. Now, do you think that would have been more or less insulting than killing Rachel at the beginning of 5 or Laurie at the beginning of Resurrection?
Well, it's a tricky question because if the rest of this film goes off the same way from that beginning, I would at least forgive it for being a good movie,
Hmm.
but making a decision I don't agree with. But Halloween 5 and Resurrection, I mean, after those deaths, the movie just goes straight to hell. So, you know, I'd say definitely 5 and Resurrection probably suffered the most from getting rid of their female protagonists. But yeah, opening Halloween 2018 with Loomis being kind of killed in a very sort of unfashionable way, I just think it wouldn't have worked. You know, especially because we never got a proper death for Loomis in the original series, if you don't count him blowing himself up in two. So I'm glad they just decided to let his legacy rest, and instead of creating a new Loomis character, instead creating an anti-Loomis character, which was interesting. So I think that they handled that well.
Now, let's talk about some of the kills, I think.
Oh yeah.
I feel like there's sort of a cross between like really bone chilling, but also slightly campy at times,
Yes.
as sort of a throwback to that era.
Yes. Yeah. Interestingly enough, is some of their like they are showing they're not trying to be too pretentious and saying, oh, we're going to be the artsy horror movie. It's like, no, no, we're going to be gory too, and we're going to, this is sort of a love letter to even the other horror films that got their takeoff from Halloween's existence. So they made sure to give you some really nice, juicy, gory kills that you would equate with like an 80s slasher film. I would say, yeah, I can like to break it up between two categories. I'd say the one death that I felt the most chilling actually was purely because of the sound effects. It is the scene where it homages Halloween 2, where he goes into that woman's kitchen, and you just see it off screen, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
you just hear him battering her over the head with a hammer, and because it was unsuspecting, she doesn't scream. You just hear her slowly grunting after each hit, and I was just like, it's so unsettling. You don't see it, but you hear it, and you know what's happening, and they did it in such a kind of a realistic way, because if that's how someone were to get you when you're not paying attention, you're not going to have a great moment where you get to scream at the camera. It's just like you're just going to go down and you're going to have no idea why. But I think my favorite sort of ridiculous over the top death was when he obviously crushed Sartain's skull.
Obviously.
Uh, because it was so over the top. I mean, he turned his head into meatloaf.
No, it was just one stomp and squish basically.
Yeah, that got a nice applause. Not just
Yeah.
because, obviously, because at that point, we wanted to see him go down after killing Hawkins, but because it was sort of like, well, you reap what you sow. But it's also just ridiculous. I mean, Michael just tilts his head and then just steps on him like a cockroach. So that definitely gets an applause and a laugh simultaneously, but in a positive way, not in a. It doesn't work against the movie.
Now, you said you wanted to mention the teenagers like Allison and her boyfriend a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I just what's it called? That's kind of feels like another homage, actually. The fact that because she has to kind of go off with her responsibility to her family for a moment, he starts going after kind of the town slut. So it
Mm.
kind of reminds me a little bit of Halloween 4 when Brady dicks over Rachel in favor of the sheriff's daughter.
Yeah.
Little moments like that, but also just to, like I said, to make it a little more real, and I think that endears us to her a little bit more, because at this point she was a pretty cool girl. You know what I mean? She wasn't frigid and afraid like Laurie was in the original movie. She's a
Yeah.
very modern girl, but at the same time, it's like, you know, essentially she's stuck in the situation where she doesn't seem to have a normal relationship with anyone. Her relationship with her mother is strained because she has a secret friendship with her grandmother. Her dad is, his head is up in the clouds, and then she has this boyfriend who she thinks is seemingly perfect, and he's just weak minded and malleable. So little things like that help add to the character, and then you even going back to what we were talking about with everything that's going on in the modern day, you have the friend
Oscar.
Oscar, who thinks that simply because he was being the nice friend at the end of the night that he earned a kiss from her. And that's another thing that I like, that they bring stuff like that up, because with everything going on today in terms of what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate, it's like that doesn't give you the right to try and kiss a girl just simply because you've had a nice moment and a nice conversation. Um, Even though the kid's a bit of a schmuck.
Although to his credit, he at least was apologetic after the fact. Like or else he could have like gone the route of like shouting at her and saying "you led me on" or whatever. But
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad they didn't go that route. I'm glad that because I think I think sometimes they go a little too much in that direction of making every teenager either be a horn dog or a rapist. So I'm glad that they at least had him. He kind of spouted all of his regrets just before dying. One of the worst deaths in the film. Yeah.
so let's give him the not as much of a jerk as you could have been award.
Sure, absolutely, but the boyfriend's an absolute asshole.
Yeah.
I was actually disappointed he didn't get killed by Michael in
Yeah,
the
yeah. I
movie.
was wondering for a while. I guess he's just not coming back.
Yeah, probably. I mean, unless they do an inevitable sequel, I don't. I doubt we're probably going to see. That guy's he's just out of the story. Um, but going to those characters, because Dave, played by Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins' son,
Mm.
he's. It's funny because the whole movie he's kind of portrayed as a careless stoner, but his final act that gets him killed is he actually goes to try and save his girlfriend, and I liked that's another character moment I
Yeah.
liked is. That he wasn't just a stoned coward who ends up dying in a comical way. He actually tries to go and rescue his girlfriend. I remember in the scene where the kid runs out and Dave makes the decision to grab the knife and go after Michael. This girl sitting next to me was with her boyfriend, and she goes, "Good for him." And I was like, you know what? Yeah, even though he's definitely not going to make it,
Yeah.
I appreciated that he actually attempted to rescue his girlfriend, which you really don't see in you really wouldn't see in any of the other horror films because the friends are the disposable characters.
Now, I would like to point out, have you ever heard of anyone having a high school Halloween party? Like I don't I feel like that's on TV and movies a lot, but I've never seen it actually happen in a high school.
That honestly, it's become more popularized. It's I honestly, when we were in high school, I feel like Halloween was like, I mean, maybe some people would have a party, but for the most part, it was you just kind of stayed at home and just hung out with your friends or did something.
Yeah.
But then once you got to college, that was when you started noticing more of a pickup of parties. And just since then, just the culture with social media, Halloween's become kind of, it used to be like the holidays were, technically it was Thanksgiving and Christmas, but since I don't know what happened in the last decade, but since with social media being so prevalent in everyone's lives, it's now like people are talking about Halloween in August and preparing for it, and I'm like, guys, calm down. Like, I like the holiday, but but people really go hard for Halloween these days. So yeah, it's funny you mention that because I actually didn't think about that. Like, yeah, they actually do have a Halloween dance, but I guess it's the Midwest, and they're a bunch of youngins,
Hmm.
so unlike us old codgers, they're having a Halloween party at their
And
school.
I like that Allison dresses as Clyde and her boyfriend dresses as Bonnie.
Yeah, it's funny when they were at the restaurant talking with the parents and they said, "Oh, we're doing Bonnie and Clyde, but we're not going to say what we're doing." I was like, It's a gender reversal." I knew that's what they were doing. That's very popular these
Yeah,
days,
yeah.
and I think it's really cool. It shows it shows a comfort with your own sexuality that you could just that you would happily wear a costume like that. Also, it adds a bit of originality and ridiculousness to it. So I love that that's a trend, and once again, little character moments. It shows that they're not just the typical couple. That they're actually that there's a little bit of quirkiness there, and that and then he throws it all away because he's a putz. But like I said, I like it's little character moments, even little moments like when Ray is setting up the rat traps. It's like you get a perfect insight as to what kind of a guy Ray is with that. He literally is just a suburban dad. That's it, but that's exactly who he's supposed to be.
Yeah. So, should we talk about the climax, I guess,
Oh
at
God,
Laurie's
yeah, yeah,
house? We've never
absolutely.
really seen like this much of a home invasion kind of climax in the way that there is in this movie. I mean, there was a little bit of it in four and H2O, but this one like really kind of flushes it out a lot.
Yeah, it's a great chess match between Laurie and Michael, because when you see it, there's that old adage, Chekhov's gun, right? It's if you show Chekhov's gun, if you show the gun earlier in the first act, it has to go off by the third act. What they do with Laurie from the beginning, when Aaron and Dana go to visit her, and it's the introduction of her stronghold. You see right up off the bat, this woman has created this impossible cage to destroy Michael. Like everything's been, it's funny at the end when they said this. This isn't my cage; it's a trap for
Yeah,
him. The funny thing is, I don't. I was a little confused as to why that line was a surprise because I felt the whole movie that was the intention. Like the whole movie, I'm like, well, yeah, I thought that was the plan. I thought your plan was to make the house the trap. I didn't realize that was meant to be subtle, but regardless, they set this up that shows that she has built this fortress, and they don't disappoint. Not only does she use it, but they don't make it so foolproof. You know what I mean? Because otherwise, the movie would end
yeah.
abruptly. But Michael is quick and he's smart too. So she for every trap that she sets up for him, he could usually use his wits to either get around it or see ahead of it. So But it's really a matter of it starts off with Michael being in control, then the two of them are on an even keel, and then eventually Michael becomes the hunted. And I think that doing it in a three-act chase was really wise because normally it's just the good guy is walking and we don't know where Michael is. But this time it's Laurie's walking, we don't know where Michael is, but then Michael is walking and we don't know where Laurie is.
Yeah.
So seeing the chase from both perspectives instead of just the hero or heroine makes it just automatically lends a whole new layer to that
Yeah,
finale.
the only small gripe I have with it is I felt like Allison sort of disappeared from the action for a little too long.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you say that. I agree. I wonder if I wouldn't be surprised if they had other things for her to do, but they decided to trim it back a bit so that they didn't have too many A/B plots going on. Because interestingly enough, a friend pointed out to me the other day that when you look at Michael's trajectory, he's literally just going door to door like a trick or treater, and he's killing people left and right. Um, but the question you have to ask yourself is: was he finding a way to search for Lori and get to her, or was it just somehow the events of the night kept pushing him towards Lori? Because you have interveners like Sartain, who of course ends up bringing Michael to Lori's house, and then it's Allison running for her life that brings Michael to the house eventually. Or is it yeah? Because technically, because then he finds the deputies, and then he ends up at the house somehow. So it's really interesting to think that sort of like forces of nature kept bringing Michael towards Laurie. I think the reason they did that is because they built it up as the final matchup of Laurie and
Yeah.
Michael, and I think what they wanted to do was they wanted Karen and Allison to seem like the ones that the little chickens that needed to be protected. But then at the end, they both show their strength and show that they're ready for him too. And well, Karen shows she's ready, and then Allison steps up to the plate at the last
Yeah.
minute. So yeah, she does kind of disappear from the film, but I think the payoff of her coming back and joining with her mom and grandma, I think makes up for it. But yeah, it's funny. I didn't think about that until you just said it. She does kind of vanish from the movie a little bit.
That was a great fake out from Karen, by the way, to kind of call out to Laurie as though she's helpless, and then when Michael appears, she says "gotcha" and shoots him instead.
Oh yeah, that's a great moment. I feel like that moment has kind of a few layers to it because Judy Greer is a great actress, but she has been sort of shoehorned and stuck in the role of the quirky best friend for the most of her
Yeah.
career. And that moment where she's crying and asking and calling out for her mother seems like oh, this is kind of the role you would expect her to play, but then she turns it on a dime and you're like, so she's not the helpless girl. And that was a really nice that was a really great moment to get her to play that and show that she's retained everything that her mother taught her, and that even though she tried to go live her normal like a normal life, she was still prepared for when the other shoe dropped. So I thought that was cool. And yeah, it was a great acting moment for her. And there needed to be when Michael goes down, it has to be cool. It has to be a great takedown. Like there's something really awesome when Loomis shoots him 6 times at the end of the first one because you finally feel like, oh, finally the son of a bitch got put down. And so you get that great moment, that great fist pump moment, when he gets shot, and then the trap starts to finally take
Yeah.
shape. No pun intended. But I think my favorite moment of that finale has to have been when Laurie falls off the balcony and lands on the
Hmm.
ground. The second I saw the shot of her, I was like, that is lifted right out of the finale of
Yep.
one. And I was like, I have no doubt, I would put money on it right
Oh
there
yeah.
that the second Michael looks back, she's going to be gone. When that happened, I was so friggin' excited. They did such a great job in because that's an homage that works and it doesn't feel like it's rubbing in your
And
face.
and they do another kind of a homage toward the end when Laurie just sort of appears out of the darkness in the background, the same way that Michael did in the first one.
Yeah, and says Happy Halloween,
Yeah.
Michael. Yeah, it's great because she gets to put him through what she had to deal with. When I think we've all seen the original film, a collective probably 2.5 million times, and as you get older, you begin to really see that it's not just kids getting killed. It's like, I mean, not that that's not terrible, but it's like she literally walked through like a fun house and watched her and saw all of her friends cut up and displayed for her in the first movie, and she had to go through this torture of not just seeing them dead. She had to run for her life. She was limping. She had got stabbed in the arm. She was begging neighbors for help. She had to rely on the kids she was babysitting to let her into the house. She had to protect them at all costs. Like, she went through so much in a span of a few minutes, and like her life essentially was destroyed from that. So that kind of trauma, the fact that she's able to kind of weaponize it and put him through it is great. But at the same time, there is something kind of chilling when Michael is being lit up in flames and he's just staring at the three
I
of
was just
them.
thinking about that. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because even though Lori wins this time, it's like she had to kind of get to his level in order to beat him.
Yeah. Yeah. And that image of the shape while the house is burning is a great image to go out on, I think.
Oh yeah, and another homage to Halloween too, because both of those both technically both direct sequels to the original film end with Michael being just encased in flames with Laurie looking on, um, and but who knows if this one's gonna take.
Yeah, yeah, I've read that Dane McBride said that they had uh, originally intended to pitch two films to shoot back to back, but they decided to just see how the first one worked before they would go any further.
Yeah. I had two feelings about that. First, good on them for just being like, you know what, we're not going to do the thing where we announce a new franchise before the first fucking movie comes out. Dark
I
Universe.
was just thinking Dark
Um,
Universe. Yeah.
it's like, and the Amazing Spider-Man films had that issue, about 5, 6 years back when they announced just after before the first one even came out, they announced like two, three, four, and like two spin-offs, and I'm like, calm down. Like, you don't know how this movie's gonna do. You may think it's a sure bet. People might not like it. But them buckling down and saying, let's just make this a really damn good movie. Let's get the world excited about Halloween again and Michael Myers, and let's get back to what makes it great. And on the other hand, I'm kind of relieved because the fact that McBride and Gordon Green had a plan for a second part already makes me feel a little more at ease because this film's doing so well. I think it's inevitable we'll get a sequel announcement probably within, if not right away, probably sometime next year.
Yeah.
So I'm that it eases me up a bit because I get nervous when they bring something back and do such a great job and then they're because they get so excited then they force out another sequel too quickly, and then it ends up crashing, which this series has a habit of doing. Halloween 4 came back and got the franchise kind of it got its legs back a little bit. And then immediately the fifth one came out a year later and wasn't very good, and it really severely damaged the franchise. And then
Yeah.
they came back strong with H2O in what was it 97, 98,
98.
and then that brought us back into the fold, and then we got stuck with Resurrection shortly after that. So it just kind of feels like every time we get it started again, we kind of get kicked to the curb. But this time, the fact that there apparently is an idea already, or maybe even a script written, makes me feel a little bit better.
It's a very hard thing, not just in cinema, but in general, to thrive while successful.
That's a perfect way of putting it. It's because sometimes you end up just simply you end up kind of I'm trying to think of the word fizzling out. by trying to imitate yourself too much. Not to go off too much on a tangent, but some movies I feel like suffer from sequelitis, where it's a whole lot of remember that, remember that, remember that, and it's like
Hmm.
yeah, I fucking remember. How about you give me a new movie? Like just take us forward and stop retreading what we know. So. Uh, I have no idea where they would go story wise for the sequel. But if
Because
they've got an
almost
idea,
everyone from this movie died except for the Strode women.
yeah, you're pretty much left with the three of them. And if Michael makes it out, then you're just gonna have to find a way to craft a story about them. But I don't know how it would work. They did a beautiful job with this. If they said today that they're retiring the franchise and this is the end, I would say I'm sorry, I'm not going to see any more Halloween movies. But this was a great way to kind of to put it to pasture. But let's be honest, it's not going to happen. That's not
No,
happening.
no. I mean, as I'm reading the numbers right now, 126 million just in North America.
Jesus, on a $10 million budget, that is absurd.
Yeah, far the highest grossing film in the franchise. And here's something kind of interesting: the best ever opening for a film starring a lead actress over 55 years old.
Interesting, interesting. First off, I always love when they find statistics like that because that's something you wouldn't think of, but when you
Yeah,
hear it, you're like, oh, that's it. Well, Jamie Lee Curtis she's an institution. Especially now, I think that something happens a lot of times in the twilight of people's careers where they now have entertained decades of different generations. And I don't want to make her sound so too old, but the fact that she's cross generational. Like everyone remembers her from something. If it's not Halloween, it's Trading Places or True Lies, or even recently, or even Freaky Friday, which had like a
yeah,
huge fan base, and then even Scream Queens, which once again just shows that she's embraced this persona and this part of her life and career. So
yeah,
she's awesome, and let's be honest, that trailer. I mean, I'm glad that the film is as good and or better than the trailer because I'll tell you that trailer when the moment she says that line, I prayed every night that he would escape so I could kill him. I was like, I cannot wait for this movie, and no, they did a great job. And I remember also saying when I saw the trailer, I said, honestly, I'm a little more scared for Michael than I am for her because she seems really adamant. But one more, yeah, another thing. See, there's so much in this movie I want to talk about. There's a couple other things I wanted to mention. Um, First, a little bit of the Hawkins character. I like that they gave him a little bit of a backstory that he was a first responder to
yeah,
the night where Michael got picked up, and apparently that he stopped Loomis from finishing Michael off. And it's just a little bit, but it gives him just an extra bit of motivation because now he's not just an officer; he's someone who let Michael live, and now Michael is out killing people, so it's sort of a guilt factor. Um, and the fact that he was if it wasn't for Sartain, he literally was gonna, as he says, blow the motherfucker's head off. And I appreciate that Hawkins was actually an active character and not just a wet blanket.
yeah,
Yeah, and then another thing, the scene with Jamie Lee Curtis with Laurie meeting her family at the restaurant after she saw Michael was so heartbreaking. I was like having a
oh
hard time
yeah,
watching that scene because that scene could have been in any movie. It didn't have to be a horror film. Watching this woman kind of break down and not really, she always acts so tough, but then seeing her finally collapse under the weight of everything that's going on, and then seeing her granddaughter be the one to console her, it was just a really really sweet moment. And like I said, these movies don't often go for these types of the emotional beats, but they did such a great job in endearing you to this family even more that you wanted to see them overcome this by the end.
hmm. Now, as we brought up before, that if this movie did in any regard well, and it's obviously doing well, that we'll probably start seeing a resurgence of slasher movies. Like there a lot of talks about the rights to the Friday the 13th franchise, and Robert Englund has said that he wants to, or he's considering wanting to play Freddy Krueger one more time, and there's a reboot of Child's Play in the works,
Yep.
which by the way, that main series is still going on, and it's still really fucking good. So I don't even know why they're doing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, they're no pun intended, but the Chucky movies are killing it on the VOD market. But I watched the
Yeah.
last two, and I was like, they're a bit nuts. But you know something, it's a movie about a talking doll. So I mean, right? But Brad Dourif has been more active in it, and the fact that his daughter is one of the lead characters is interesting.
Yeah.
But I actually liked the last two Chucky films.
Yeah, me too.
But you know, that's the thing is a lot of I feel like nowadays regimes are always changing, and I feel like a lot of times they don't want to continue what other creatives were working on. They'd rather just start from scratch. With Friday the 13th, if they could do something, it doesn't have to be of the quality of this new Halloween, but if they can, you know, do something and really make like a damn good return for Jason Voorhees, instead of just making kind of a souped up version of what we've already seen, I would definitely be interested in that. And there's no reason not to continue Nightmare on Elm Street. Robert Englund can slip back into that character in his sleep. He's still as interesting in it as ever. And Freddy is he will never not be popular. He's one of the most iconic cinematic villains of all time. There's no reason to just do another one. You know, like start the series up again. Like especially because the character has personality. So like
Yeah.
you can get that kick started relatively easily.
We just saw him reprise the role on an episode of the Goldbergs on ABC.
Yeah, I was told about that. I haven't watched it yet, but everyone was raving about it, so I'm definitely going to take a look at it. I definitely, yeah, I think that this movie is going to kick off that craze. My only fear is, you know, a lot of times they'll do they'll do like something very nostalgic like this and bring it back with a new face. But then sometimes the imitators really start to suck right away. You know,
Yeah.
like when they were doing the live action Disney movies, and like I feel like movies like Maleficent and Alice in Wonderland aren't very good, but that's my opinion. But I feel as though sometimes the people who are mimicking these films don't really look at what actually works. They just see the money. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's a business. They got to make their dough. But with the response to this movie, the fact that you have people coming out going, it's not just a good horror film; it's a good movie in general. I'm hoping that that's going to be more consistent. And I have to say, we've had a pretty good couple of years. I mean, between you have the Conjuring series, and then you have movies like Hereditary and The Witch, and you know, really interesting different types of horror films that are coming out of the
Yeah.
woodwork. But the thing is, the slasher movie's been has been gone. So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I would like to see the slasher movie come back.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Scream 4 kind of tried to revitalize the craze a little bit, but it didn't really work. And yeah, there really hasn't been anything until now.
Yeah, you know, Scream 4, I feel almost came out a little too soon. I actually think that that movie actually could have come out a little bit later. Um, uh, and I think it would have been interesting if they did a Scream 4 that takes place that was in the modern age where in the series the stab series is dead and they're only VOD movies now, and all the
Mm.
horror films that people watch are supernatural. And then you can imagine that the killer would have to create more interesting and elaborate ways to kill people because people don't care about slashers anymore. That could have been a really, really compelling Scream 5. And they could still do it, it's just unfortunately with old West gone,
Yeah.
it kind of feels, it kind of almost feels like they would probably have to wait a bit, a grace period before they could touch that franchise.
Yeah, I don't even know who owns that franchise anymore because it was Dimension
Dimension
for
is
a long
yeah,
time.
I'm pretty sure Dimension's long since dead, right? I haven't seen anything
Yeah.
about Dimension in a while. Yeah, we shall see in terms of what we have next for the slasher genre, but no doubt, however you slice this, once again, no pun intended, there's going to be a big resurgence. I'm just hoping that it's a good resurgence and not a mediocre one.
The only franchise that I'm just kind of done with, and I hope that they just leave it alone, is Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah, they've had enough attempts with
I think
that.
that's over and done.
Yeah, because especially with respect to fans of that franchise, it's just to me it really feels that they never really found their footing after that original movie.
Yeah,
I mean, I like the second one with Dennis Hopper. That's a movie that you can watch because it's ridiculous.
yeah,
It's a flat out strange comedy essentially.
yeah.
It does kind of what Gremlins 2 did to Gremlins 1, where it's like it's more of a satire of the previous film than it is a direct sequel. And then all of
Right.
them after that just they got worse and worse and worse. So and then the remakes and the prequels. And then I remember recently a friend of mine saw the newest whatever one that came out a year ago, and I'm like, so is this? So I was like, where does this take place in the timeline? He said it's a prequel. I said, is it a prequel to the remake? Is it a prequel to the? Is it a prequel to the prequel of the remake? Is it a prequel to the original? I mean, what's going on here? And no one knows, and no one cares. It's the same movie. It takes place in a sticky backwater town. It's a white trash family. It's a big gigantic killer with a flesh mask, and he just cuts through a bunch of sweaty teenagers. It's just not appealing to me. I don't know. Like I think that they really should definitely put that out to pasture and just be done with it.
I've always thought that Leatherface was always the least interesting character in all these movies.
Yeah, because he literally is just a bulldozer, and he just runs through people. There's so much more that Michael, is that slow, predatorial equivalent of the Grim Reaper. Jason, at least, when he's charging through, there's more of like a formidable threat to him. Pinhead is kind of like a magistrate of hell. He's almost diplomatic. And then of course Freddy is one of the most charming serial murderers you'll ever meet. So they all have kind of something they bring to the table. But I just Leatherface to me, if you want to do another Texas Chainsaw, be ballsy and make a movie about Ed Gein, who it's based on, and
Yeah.
make a hybrid of Ed Gein's story, and maybe turn him into Leatherface, but do something different for the love of God.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. We were talking about Halloween, weren't we?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. We were talking about that movie.
But yeah, we've been talking almost as long as the movie's runtime, so I think now's probably a good time to stop. But
I think.
there's a
Yeah.
lot to dissect with this genre, obviously.
Oh God, yeah. And that's another thing about this movie is it's just there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to mull over, and the more I think about it, the more I like it, and the more I see, like the more I realize just how impressive it is, and all different new things that I like every time I think about it. So I'm gonna see it a couple of more times, definitely.
Your rating out of 10?
Oh, I'm just gonna go for a 10. I know people aren't supposed to do tens, but fuck it, I'm giving it a 10.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this movie is still fresh in our mind. It's only been out for about 2 weeks, but yeah, I would give it a 9 as well.
Yeah, it's a damn good movie. So I'm definitely gonna be seeing it a few more times, and I will be buying the Blu-ray.
Okay, so I guess that's all we have to talk about for now. I will most likely be back for the next movie.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be back for the. I'm sure we'll be back discussing the announcement when they start talking about Halloween, about the third Halloween 2 or the fourth Halloween 2. I don't know. I don't know. Whatever.
By the way, how are we gonna refer to this movie specifically? Just Halloween 2018?
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm calling it now. Like I call like the '89 Batman. I call it Batman 1989 now. As far as I'm concerned, that's the title. It's just easier when you're talking about these movies.
I like to use directors like I'll say Tim Burton's Batman, or like with the 2007 version, it's easy to say Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Oh yeah, I call it just the zombie Halloween. I mean that's the best way to refer to it as. But yeah, there's designations for every film.
All right, well, I guess that's all we've got for now. So have a happy Halloween and be safe, have fun, eat lots of candy, and watch lots of scary movies.
Absolutely, everyone's entitled to one good scare.
All right. So I'm Jeremy Kelly speaking for John Curcio, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Take care, folks.